Hi all, my name is Akiko. I introduced myself briefly earlier. I forgot to mention, so I have been in recruiting and HR for the last 8 years. Started on the agency side of things and have thus moved over to the corporate side. So I've been at Alchemy for 2 years now. Before I share some tips on resumes, I want to just say that all resume reviewers, all hiring managers, all recruiters are just people at the end of the day. We all have different opinions. We all have different biases when we are, hiring. And so these are just opinions from my perspective, being in the industry, but every other recruiter, every other hiring manager might have something different to share. And so I definitely encourage building a network of people that you trust, people that you can have in your corner. Take all advice kind of with a little bit of a grain of salt, and really determine who you value, whose feedback you really want to keep, what really matters the most to you. Some of these tips might not be applicable to you at all, and maybe you hear them all and you're like, wow, I did not like any of that, and that is totally fine. So that's just a little caveat that I'm going to share before starting. So, what I like to share before talking about resumes is just the process of, getting a job. And I think that how I break it down is essentially there's 3 steps, right? There's the recruiter screening that you're trying to get to, there's a team interview stage that you're trying to get to, and then you get to the offer. You don't just get the job because you've got a good resume. And so, how I like to break it down is essentially if you realize, because I have a few people come to me and they're like, hey, I get a lot of resume reviews. Like, I have been talking to so many recruiters and I'm not getting past that stage. Or they're like, hey, I've submitted 50 resumes all over the place and I'm just not getting a single ping. Like, do you have tips? And essentially, you have to think about it in different stages. So what I like to say is essentially if you are shooting out your resume in 50,000 places and you're not getting even the recruiter or the initial screening, maybe you need to go back to your resume and figure out what about it is kind of hindering your ability to get that first step. If you realize that you are getting past the recruiter initial screening, you think it's going really well, you think you've got a great resume, and then you're just not making it to the team interview stage, it might be something that you're saying in the initial screenings, or maybe the role that you're applying for is just not the right fit. There could be a plethora of reasons, and it might just be a matter of trying to continue developing skills and continuing to build your resume along the way. And then if you realize that you've had several team interviews, you're interviewing at a lot of companies, things are going great, and you just haven't received that offer yet, that might be where you want to take a look at what's going on in the team interviews, how you're connecting with the team, maybe how you're demonstrating your actual experiences versus what's on the resume. So these are just things that, you kind of think about when looking for a job. But before you get to those steps, what I like to tell people is you want to make sure that you are getting to know yourself throughout the entire process. Job searching, I think, is kind of a lifelong skill to know, being able to build resumes, being able to connect with others. If you are fortunate and you have one job for the 45 years that you're working, that's amazing. But, that's just not the reality. And that's okay for a ton of different reasons. So know yourself, create a plan for your career path, create a plan for the specific job search that you have, because at every stage it's going to be different unless you're just applying for the same exact position every single time. I highlighted that we are going over updating and tailoring your resume. And then update your LinkedIn, make sure that is always up to date with your resume every time you're looking for new opportunities, and then just continue building your network along the way. So this is probably data that we've seen just because it is 4 years old, but it is pretty true. Recruiters spend about 7.4 seconds reviewing your resume, just on average. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little more. There are things that help make your resume stick out a little bit more than others. And there are things that you can do, obviously, that are going to hinder your ability to get past a resume review. And so resumes that really stuck out were those that featured simple layouts, had clear sections and heading titles, were organized by E or F reading patterns, meaning left to right, top to down. and had bold titles and bulleted accomplishments. So pretty self-explanatory, but essentially if you had a well-organized resume that was formatted in a beautiful, aesthetically pleasing way, you had more likelihood than those who had cluttered layouts, lacked white spaces, maybe had way too small of fonts just all over the place, had multiple columns. So I see people with 2 columns on the resume and that's pretty clean. Once you start getting 3 or 4 and boxes and things, like it just starts getting a little bit confusing. They lacked sections or headers. They just started, it's just like a stream of consciousness. Had text that didn't flow and did not draw the eye down. It started drawing the eye left, right, up, down, and then had a reliance on keyword stuffing. And that's kind of an interesting thing that I'll talk about later is keyword stuffing. But as a recruiter, this is what I personally look for in resumes. And I know that other recruiters that I work with look for similar, but again, there are recruiters who might look for something different. So relevant work experience as evidenced by job titles and bulleted experiences. Unique job titles are tailored to those that kind of match the industry. So for example, one of my early positions was a hub coordinator. And that's because my particular organization was categorized by hubs, and hubs meant all the different offices in the different cities and states, but nobody knows what that means. Essentially, I was a recruiting and HR coordinator, but when I had hub coordinator on there, it's like, what does that even mean? So I changed my resume to say recruiting and HR coordinator. And then bulleted experiences include keywords that demonstrate accomplishments and highlights rather than tasks completed. And so that means, if you use JavaScript in your role, or if you use a specific tool or technology or anything like that, you actually talk about what you did, how you used it, and what impact it had with the company versus utilize JavaScript to write front-end code. Like that's pretty, that's pretty obvious / that's kind of like a task that was completed versus the impact that you made. Pertinent skills listed in the skills section as well as throughout the resume. Few to no gaps in employment is ideal. I think it's obviously there are situations where there could be reasons for that. And as long as you have a way to just explain it, I think that's all that matters. But that's personally what I also look for. Experience for multiple years or multiple positions under similar job titles. And then maintained employment as in not a job hopper every 4 months, 5 months, because sometimes we do see candidates who are just constantly switching jobs. And at a certain point, hiring managers will ask about that and just say, hey, is there a reason they're not staying there? Is there the fear and the risk that they might leave our company because they haven't found what they're looking for? And there's always a reason for why you might not have relevant work experience, why you might not have been able to maintain employment, why there might be gaps. But if you can try to eliminate that in writing on initial review, try to do that the best that you can. And then, of course, the last 2 bullet points are going to be less applicable to those who are changing industries or starting a job search for the first time. Tips for first tech jobs. Sharing your portfolio, your GitHub, Stack Overflow. There's a lot of different websites, portfolio sites, things like that. Definitely share where you demonstrate your code. We were actually talking to Shama earlier today. She is a recruiter at Amazon. And the thing about all recruiters is that we are investigators. We like to know a lot more about who you are, what you've done, everything like that. So we love looking at LinkedIn. We love looking at all the portfolios you have. We love looking at your repos. Even if we don't fully understand, it's just really interesting to get kind of like an overall view of who you are as a person versus just words on a resume. And so it's important wherever you can to have links to those. And not only that, but if you don't have it, start making it. It's never too late to start. And then a thing that is kind of interesting that I've noticed on some portfolios and resumes is that they are hyperlinked to a PDF or Word. Sometimes that works. You know, obviously we're looking at these things on a computer, but what's the most helpful is when it is actually spelled out. So like linkedin.com/Akiko Bremar, because I can just copy that and put that right into my browser versus opening up a new tab, trying to like click it and it doesn't click. And then for some reason I got to figure it out. Really having it spelled out sometimes helps infinitely. Highlighting only relevant experience from old jobs. So obviously, if you're getting your first tech job, it means that you haven't had previous experience, and that's totally fine. But if you were coming from a barista from Starbucks, you know, maybe not necessarily talking about all of that is going to be as pertinent as maybe any leadership experience you've had there, or what customer service experience you have, or like where have you really kind of gone above and beyond that role. If it does not matter to the tech job that you're applying to, it's okay to leave it off. And I know it seems like your resume might look a little empty. And if that's ever the case, you can always have a previous experiences section and just label, you know, the job title and the role that you held. And that'll be enough just so that it shows you're not just sitting around twiddling your thumbs for years, but highlight only relevant experience, highlight relevant projects, whether that be projects that you've done with you know, yourself that you're just doing at home, whether that be any freelance work that you've done, anything that you can do to demonstrate that you know a little bit more and can actually bring something to the table when you join a tech job. That's important. And then keep your resume short and sweet, especially if this is your first job. There is absolutely no reason to have more than 2 pages on your resume if you are getting your first tech job, because most likely there's no way that you've done that many projects alone. And even if you have, you want to be able to also kind of word it in a succinct way. You know, we talk to professionals that have 15 years of experience, of pertinent experience, and they keep it to 2 pages. So, you know, that's just something to kind of keep in mind. And then sections that every resume should have, in my opinion, no matter what, is always the summary section. Okay, I say that, I'm like, but you basically want to like kind of like say something a little bit about yourself or highlight it. And if you don't do a summary section, then just go straight to your skills. So, you know what? But the next section you should definitely have is a list of skills, and they should be a list of your hard skills. If you want to add soft skills, you can, but the hard skills are going to be the most pertinent, especially for tech jobs. You want to have those listed out, as well as the professional experience where the skills are sprinkled throughout. And then an education section, including certifications. If you didn't receive any degrees, then you'll want to highlight either the GED or the high school, but you do want to just show a little bit about what you learned, and then projects as applicable. And then how to use keywords and buzzwords. I think it's really interesting, and I'm curious to hear how you do things over at Amazon, actually, Shama. But you know, you always hear about this AI robot that's essentially kicking you out. And it's really funny because, at least in the roles that I've had, yes, we use an ATS, and yes, there are ways that we're kind of like screening candidates out. But at the end of the day, there's a reason that there are recruiters at every single company. You need somebody that's reviewing the resumes. You need somebody that's having the interviews. And so I do send automated messages. We do have an automated message that says, thank you for applying, you know, unfortunately, whatever. But that's not just some robot. You know, a lot of times that actually is a person. And it's really funny because we at Alchemy have gotten several responses to the automated messages. And you can just tell that someone thinks that it's just a robot, but it's actually people on the other side. So list out all your skills, including keywords if they're applicable, in a skills section, but then sprinkle those words throughout, showing how you use them, and not just the fact that you did use them. And if you're wondering where to find what those keywords and buzzwords might be, it will always be in the must-haves of a job description. No matter what level of position it is, they'll always say, hey, we are looking for this tech stack, or hey, we're looking for these tools, these experiences, things like that. So you want to make sure that you're tailoring your resume to the specific position that you're applying for. I do have candidates who kind of have a varied background. Maybe they've done product management, maybe they've also done some project management and some Scrum Master work, and that's totally fine. But if you are applying for a product manager role, or if you are applying for a dev role, really try to eliminate as much as the other stuff as you can. Maybe just highlighting one, maybe two sentences on the others. Otherwise, it will start to look like you are not as, not that you're not as experienced, but it just seems like you've almost done too much, to where did you do too much that you didn't actually contribute to the work that you really needed to do? And are you as skilled in the one area that we specifically need? So, being thoughtful about that. And then what else to include on resumes? Contact information. So phone numbers in an easy to read format. I see a lot of resumes with this like 1, 2, 3, 4, like all the numbers are bunched together. It's kind of hard to see them. So these are just things that like help. It's like not necessarily, but it helps. Email address, professional. City and state, especially as we move to remote environments and people are able to hire remotely, all that's really needed is the city that you're in and the state. You do not need to include a full address, but you can, but not including states in where you are, it does confuse recruiters sometimes, because they'll start calling you and then it's like 15 minutes into the call, you find out that they're like located somewhere else and they didn't want the job in Dallas. And then you're like, what's going on? So yeah, it helps. Also, another part about that is that there are companies now that are moving to a remote world, but they cannot hire from all states, unfortunately, because there are certain tax laws that that hinder their ability to work with all employees from all states. And so that's also another way to really save your time, as well as the recruiters. But you just don't want to get into a conversation with someone and at the end of the day, they actually couldn't hire you to begin with for that reason. Another thing which I forgot to add on here is sometimes it helps to include if you are, if you have a visa status like OPT or H-1B, because there are companies that also cannot hire for that. It's not necessarily discriminatory that they wouldn't be able to, because at the end of the day, it's just for legal matters that they won't. So sometimes having that also saves your time and the recruiter's time by not wasting time on phone calls. But that's just, something else. And then LinkedIn spelled out, not just hyperlinked. Yeah. And then what to leave off, in my opinion. So references available upon request, that's kind of a given. Hopefully if someone says, hey, can I have references? You're not going to say no. So there's just no need to do that. GPA, unless it's a 3.8, really is not needed. You can demonstrate that you're a stellar student, but if you're kind of average, there's nothing wrong with that at all, but you just don't need to highlight it. High school information, if you've graduated from undergrad, it's a given that you went to high school at one point, so really you can take that information off. And then a list of random courses, unless it's because you had pursued additional classes or you've got a degree beyond, or like you took a specific course in the area that you're looking to get a job in. There's just no need to have like data science 101, on there. And then miscellaneous interests. This is just something that I kind of thought was interesting. So I think that there are interests that you can add to your resume that would demonstrate skill and ability and kind of like expertise. So for example, like a musical instrument, or maybe you have a certain hobby that like a collegiate sport, or like something like that, that demonstrates you kind of went a little bit above and beyond what you would normally do, what the average candidate might normally do. Maybe it demonstrates that you have a certain passion in a certain area, but miscellaneous interests, like I like to travel and I like cars, like that's cool and all, but I would actually save that for your resume or your LinkedIn, where you can just add a short little blurb of like, this is a little bit about me and who I am, but it's just not needed on the resume. And then high school summer work experience, unless it's relevant to the job. And then final notes. So these are things that could just help your case or the recruiting manager, but truly organizing your resume, reverse chronological order, no matter what. I have some resumes that come in and they're just kind of a mix of everything. And getting on the phone with candidates, they'll kind of explain it. They're like, oh, it's because I thought this was more important. But I'm like, initially, because our recruiters' brains is to look at your recent experience. And if I see 2018 on there, I'm like, wait, did they not work for 4 years? And then like down the line, I'm like, oh, wait, no, they're working right now. You know, so it just gets a little confusing. Utilizing month and year format for dates on your resume versus just the years. You know, some people do just put years down because they're a little embarrassed that maybe they had a shorter work stint, but it is a little bit confusing when you just see just the date, just the years all around. Keeping it to 1 to 2 pages. Saving your resume as first name, last name, resume. It's just easier for the recruiter or the hiring manager to find your resume again when they need to share it either with other recruiters on the team or to just add it to a calendar invite or something like that. You'd be, I was gonna include a little screenshot, but I didn't want to include people's names on there, so I didn't. But there's just like tons of different ways people like to save their resume, which is interesting. And always use LinkedIn as an extension of your resume. So if you have additional information you want to add, if there is some fun things you want to share, anything like that, definitely put it on LinkedIn. Just because there's more space on there, it's easier to click around, things like that. Keep your resume for what's the most important and necessary. Then yeah, that's really all I've got for you.
Thank you. It looks like we had one question in the chat about using the summary to justify a gap in employment. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, that would actually be very helpful. And regarding the summary section, I would try to keep it like your elevator pitch where you only have maybe 3 or 4 sentences up there. Some people will use the summary section as almost like a cover letter, and it's like a paragraph. Keep it short and sweet, and then definitely if there is anything that you want to explain in there like a gap, that would be the perfect place to put it.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have one other question. I want to go ahead and get started, so we'll have this question before we jump over, but can LinkedIn ever have too much information, like over 20 plus years of experience?
Not necessarily. It kind of depends. It kind of depends on what you were doing. It kind of depends on what you were doing, the industry that you're in and everything like that. Not necessarily, because again, LinkedIn would be an extension of your resume. I personally don't think so. The only thing is that I know that you're not supposed to discriminate against age. I will say that some people do. And so that is just something to keep in mind for yourself. Just for yourself.
All right, getting close to the end of our time.
Oh, that's so fast.
Yeah, hopefully it's been enough time for people to get some feedback. But like we were just mentioning, it's a great way to get some one-on-one feedback virtually. But if you leave that session with some advice or takeaways that you need to go work through on your own and want to get additional feedback on your resume, would love if you shared it in career advice on Slack.
It seems like we're all in kind of really different places, and that's actually really exciting to see that we have such a breadth of time and experience. I've seen like a lot of different like experience levels, and it's really great to hear like what y'all are struggling with and like how we can help facilitate like talks kind of like we have today. So if any of y'all have thoughts or ideas or anything pops up in your head, please definitely feel free to share.